All right. It is 6:05. Recording has started, and we will get started on our presentation. So, before I get started, does anybody have any questions about anything up until now? Everybody has at least cloned the Git repository, which has the updated code. I just pushed it a couple minutes ago. So, yeah, if you have that you'll want that updated code. That way, you can work with us. All right, no questions. I'll go ahead and get started. We are getting started on time today, which is super nice, which means we will probably not go the whole time. We are going to be finishing up with some of the stuff that we've started on so far. And this is pretty much all of the important stuff that you would need to know to really get started into WebDev and really sort of get moving and working with the higher level stuff that we're going to get into. So, I'm going to switch over to presentation. Awesome. So, what is wrong with you? Okay, whatever. So, HTML forms, advanced CSS, responsive design, and intro to frameworks and libraries. It's a lot of stuff, but we're going to go over it quickly. It's not very difficult to understand. It's been updated recently, from which I found out recently. The forms have been updated for HTML, which makes it a lot easier to work with. And then we'll be looking at a couple of advanced CSS and how they relate to responsive design. So lots of fun stuff. HTML forms. Forms are great. What is an HTML form? Well, HTML form is, it's just like a form. You fill it out and you submit the form, like a Google form or something like that. So an HTML form is literally just a form. It has some inputs of different types, and you can use those inputs to do something. Like in our example, we're probably going to be using it to execute some JavaScript code. All forms are wrapped in form elements. And they are now using input. So you'll do like input type equals and then some sort of type. Used to, you would have like a radio, a button, and like we did in our example, where we had a button that did something. It was a button element. They actually don't do that anymore, interestingly enough. They use input type equals button. That's the proper way to do it. So as you can see in our example, we have input type equals radio, comma checkbox, comma submit. These are just different examples. You can only do one at a time, obviously. Name would be the name of the input. It's not super, it is important, but it's not super important for this. So you'll want to make sure that your ID is something unique, but the name really comes in important when you're defining like a radio button group. If you don't know what a radio button is, it's where the little holes are, and you click on one, and whenever you click on one, it deselects the other one. So it's important that those are linked in some way to know that you only click on one. So the names for all of the linked ones together will have to be the same. Another one that is used is label. This is a new one as well. So label, you would put label and then for, and then the ID of whatever the input the label is for, and then you put the text inside of it. So now how do we handle forms? Traditionally, you would use PHP, but it's 2021 and PHP is surprisingly not dead, but it should be. So we're going to be using JavaScript to handle this. So whenever you would have an onSubmit, and this onSubmit would allow you to execute some code, just like we did before with the onClick. And the only thing we got to keep in mind is that this onSubmit will send it will send some data into the function. Normally, we haven't been handling the event data. All we need to know is that the button was clicked and it will execute the function. But it does actually send some data with it. The one thing that it does send is the event, which is like we'll look at it at the JavaScript console and see exactly what the event holds. But it's important that we call prevent default, because by default, the submit button will usually redirect you to another page or something. And we don't want to do that. We want to handle it locally in the JavaScript. So yeah, we have to prevent the default action of the submit button. And then we would, in order to grab the data from the boxes, we would just use the get element by ID as we've been doing to get data. Awesome. Let's open our code editor and let's do some practice. So right now we have, let's do a bit of restructuring here. Hopefully everybody can see it fine. So we'll have, let's say, a user account manager will be the header here. Let's change our title here. Something simple. And in here, we'll have we'll leave this here, we'll rename these some links to different This is a bit of a long-winded way of saying create some elements. There we go. So links to different parts of the site. I'll keep it consistent. So yeah, we won't worry about that right now. That'll just update the site here.
I don't want to interrupt you guys, but what room is this? I'm sorry. SES 250?
SES 250?
Yeah.
South. So that would be.
Is that the new building?
No. I wouldn't be able to.
Across the
Okay.
street?
Yeah, I think it's across the street and down a bit, if I recall.
Yeah, it's directly across. So you're in the labs, so there's like the 4 labs, you know, like there's the overarching like roof area when you're outside still, just across the street and it's SES.
Okay, thank you. I haven't lived from this side of 13 years ago.
Yeah, some great planning. All right. So yeah, and then we'll up here we'll just change this to list of users on our site. And I'll just add me as an example, and that's the only user we'll have for now. But we'll want to add more users. So we'll go ahead and remove this button here. And we'll go ahead and remove everything else from here because they're not super important. That isn't the footer. All right. So now we just have one user. It's me, Mario. And we will go ahead and we'll create a form. So what will we need for our form? First off, let's replace this with onClick equals, or sorry, not onClick, on submit equals, and we'll run some of our JavaScript. I think we already had add elements or something here. It's capital A. Add elements, and we'll go inside the form here. Now, let's go ahead and let's make a section, and then we'll put this form in the section. And we'll do H2, add a new user. There we go. So we'll add a little horizontal rule here. Don't worry too much about it. Just to separate it off and make sure it's all it sort of can identify the separate part of the page. So we'll have a label, and we'll have an input type text will be fine. And we have a text here. We'll give this an ID of fname, and then we'll set the for here for fname. Give it a label text of first name. All right. So you'll see we have our first name here. Give it a little bit spacing. That's okay. I think I would want the first name probably above the text field. So you have like first name, text field, last name, text field. So let's do a little bit of CSS here. So if you recall, I can go in here and add anything that is a label. And we'll say the display will be block. So this is a block element, and if you recall, you can't have a block element will take up the entire width of the page, and only that block element can be there. So this will allow us to separate that. And real quick, let me add another horizontal rule here so we can separate the footer. And then in the styles, we'll put some padding, top, I don't know, 50 pixels. There. I'll separate it out a little bit. So yeah, let's go ahead and finish our form here. Now, what else might we need? We'll do last name. And last name with an input for text with an ID of name. And then we'll have another input type of button. The name, submit. Where's it? text. All right. It's been a minute since I made this presentation, so give me just a second. And you can look up all of these types on Google and have a good idea of what everything sort of looks like. Yeah, that's what I thought. So button, it's value. So button needs a value parameter, and this will be the actual value that it contains. See, now we have a submit user. And I'm going to change this real quick. So I want this submit user to be on another line. So instead of setting the labels to be block, I'm going to set all the inputs to be block. So this will sort of add that here. And then let's go ahead and add some padding around our button. But I'm actually going to stop doing these manual style elements here, and let's go ahead and make it look a little bit pretty before we do the functionality. Generally, you would make it functional before you make it look pretty, but since we're already here, we'll use btn and btn-primary. There we go. From our, if you remember from our Bootstrap lesson, and let's go ahead and add some padding, 20 pixels. We could do it on all of the inputs. That's fine. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Oh yeah. So inputs are a little bit weird on how they handle padding. So in this case, we will just do. It's easy ways to handle this. So something to keep in mind is that, like, if you want to modify something from Bootstrap, like if I just put in btn here, or .btn to reference the class, and I add some padding here, it will overwrite some of the styles for the Bootstrap. So you will want to keep that in mind. I'm pretty sure, if I recall, it does overwrite the Bootstrap. Then there's obviously this issue here. But let me try something real quick. That's what I was looking for. Okay, so when you're dealing with inputs and stuff, you want to use margin instead of padding. Padding, so it's important to understand. You'll want to, on your own time, if you want to look up the box model, it's really good for understanding exactly how these are formatted. But margin adds space around the element. Padding adds space inside the element, if that makes any sense. So for certain elements, padding won't affect it for most elements, but for like inputs and stuff, it does actually modify and affect the element here. All right, so let's go ahead. Now let's open up the Bootstrap documentation. Again here, I believe there's some for input. Oh, we can just add the input group text. I don't think these look a whole lot different. Let me add a value here. I don't want to get too deep into this. You can always read it on your own time. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Okay, nope, that's not what I'm looking for. I don't recall, there is an element where you have that sort of gray text, but I don't think it's going to change too much because Firefox sort of adheres to the Bootstrap standard, so if it's an unstyled element, you're going to see it sort of look similar to Bootstrap, especially when you're dealing with inputs and stuff, because inputs don't look that much different from here to there. But it is nice to sort of use these because like you get this blue outline and stuff, which is really cool. So yeah, we'll have to use that at some point. Oh, it's a placeholder is what it is for that. Yeah. Awesome. So we have a little form here. We have a submit user button. Make sure that this is actually, so there is a difference between a button and a submit button. So if you're submitting a form, you would use type equals submit, and this would run something. So we have our on submit. It should be running add elements, and then add elements. Grab some data, and it looks like what we did last time would just append some stuff to a name list. So go ahead and make sure that when we submit something, should add some stuff to the list, which it is not. Thinking it is because of this. Okay, I mean, fairly certain that that's how it's called. Let me check. Let's check the JavaScript console. That's always a good idea if you're having issues like this. Network error. Network error when attempting to fetch a resource. Okay, so we know that it's being called, so that's fine. We are going to get rid of this anyway, so let's go ahead and comment this out. Actually, we won't get rid of it quite, we'll just add another one. We'll call it add user. And we will want to take in an event. As I explained before, it is going to send an event with it, and we're going to do event.prevent default. I'm going to change this to add user. That way when we submit, type error, event is undefined. Okay. Let me just confirm. It should be sending should be setting an event with it. Yeah, function submit. Okay. So there is actually another way to add without doing this on submit here. I prefer to do it this way because when you're looking at the code, especially when you're looking at HTML code, you want to see what is calling what. And having an on submit here makes it super easy to do, but there are some limitations. The first limitation being that it seems that it is not going to pass the event handler data in through that. It's not going to pass the event data through through the function. So we actually have to tell JavaScript that we are going to add this. We're going to add an event handler to the form, and then it'll recognize that, hey, this is actually an this actually is going to receive an event. So let's go ahead and grab our form. Let's go ahead and grab our ID here, which we don't have. Add user form. Awesome. And now if we do form dot on submit equals, and then we're going to tell it which function to call, which is add user. All right. Now, if we execute our form is null, it's telling us the form is null. So we got our element by ID, our form, the add user form. Well, we're getting it by our ID, but does not seem to be actually getting that ID. Okay, let's try this a different way. Actually, we will just go ahead and do the on submit here, but technically it like reloads the page, so it'll be kind of weird. Normally you would have the event.prevent default, but since it wants to be a pain, we're not going to worry about that for now. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and grab our elements. Const fname field document dot get element ID. We're going to go ahead and grab the fname element. Grab the lname field. Get element by ID. And grab the last name. And for now, just for testing, we'll go ahead and log out the first and last name field. Put in my first name. Object HTML element. This would be dot value, if I recall. There we go. Yeah, it's dot value. We'll get you the actual value in the field. Awesome. Submit the user, and there we go. We got a user. Also, we grabbed this data from a form. We executed some JavaScript code. So fancy. Let's go ahead and let's do something with this. We'll just do what we did before here. We'll create a list item and append it as we've done in the past. Yes. One of the most important things you'll learn how to do in JavaScript and in programming in general is how to use the Control-V, Control-C, Control-V buttons. We'll go ahead and grab the list item. Text content will be this. Our first and last name. We gotta grab our name here, our main unordered list here. Save that. We have a syntax error. Oh, I left this closing parenthesis. All right, let's add another name. We'll do John Snow. And this is where the issue that I was explaining would come in. Why I said that we need to do the event.prevent default. Because when we go in here and add our user, you'll see, if you watch very quickly, you'll see it adds it, but then it reloads the page and it's gone now. So that's why we need to have that event.prevent default, which it does not seem to want to let me do. So, very unfortunate. Yeah, dang, that sucks. No way to get... Yeah, that genuinely sucks. So I'll have to get back to everyone afterwards to see what changes need to be made here. Yeah. All right. So now we have that. Let's go ahead and get to the rest of our presentation. Not some quickly, because I know we don't have a whole lot of time. I just want to go over Flexbox. If you're not familiar with Flexbox, Flexbox is a way to to basically order elements. Anything Bootstrap uses Flexbox for all of for how it organizes all of the elements and containers. So when you want, for example, a bunch of elements to be beside each other, and you want them to automatically scale based off of sort of move around the screen as the screen the screen size changes. So for example, let's go ahead and let's look at our current way that we are handling our sort of side by side here. So this is not a great way to do it. It's sort of an old way to do it. We want to make this a little bit more modern. So let's go ahead and we'll have this div that has our sidebar. We are going to go ahead and I'm going to put this in its own div. Shouldn't have any effect on anything, but it's good. Divs are more like, it's good to add your classes to divs because divs are easier to predict what their actions are going to do. And then the main is obviously the main. So let's actually move this sideline me. This should actually be inside the main. Then inside here, we're going to move everything that we've worked on in the main part of the page into its own section. Shouldn't have any effect on anything. And we're going to give this an ID of body. So let's go ahead and look at our CSS. We're going to remove this float right here. We're going to do display flex. All right, that's going to move everything over to the side. And we'll do dot body. We also want to set this display to be flex. Now, we are going to set actually these all need to be part, let me double check something, our main here. So we got one section, okay. I'm going to go ahead and set this, the actual sort of container for this is going to be set to flex. And then we're going to set the flex direction to row. And this basically tells it, okay, we want everything to be sort of side by side. Now, does not seem to want to be put side by side. Not dot main, just main. Can't spell main. There we go. Okay, so now you see that we have these side by side. I would like this to be on the other side like we had before. We do have a flex reverse, which will push it over to the side. Now we want our sort of main body. We're going to have the I believe it's flex align. No. It's flex basis, I think. No. Justify content left. No, that doesn't want to do it. We will want to set we want the main part to be body, or the main part to be bigger than the other part of the other section. So we're going to set this to 2, for example. And then when we set the sideline flex grow to 1, and is it the other way around? What this will basically do is that the size that this is, it's kind of hard to explain, but these are basically ratios. So the body should get twice as much space as the sideline main or element, because there's 2 elements inside of this main, and they're going to be put side by side, and this is going to get 2 parts, and this is going to get 1 part. So yeah, Flexbox is fun. It's the more modern way to handle these. Right now it doesn't look too pretty, but we'll work on it a little bit once we have a little bit more time. We'll actually, next time we'll be looking more at actually how to use this in like with Bootstrap and stuff, because they'll handle all of this Flexbox for you, because Flexbox is very annoying and very quirky sometimes. So let's look at media queries really quickly. Media queries basically are a way to make things responsive. So you have a cell phone. The website would look different on a cell phone than it would on your computer. So you would have a query, a media query, like this one here, which would allow you to do certain actions based on how the screen works, or the size of the screen. So we'll do a max width of 576 pixels, which is like for a cell phone or something. And then in that case, we'll set main. The display would be, we'll do block. Then as we make this smaller, you see it changes. And now it's all in one line. This is actually very common for this to be done. I would recommend moving this to the bottom, because normally you would have like a separate bar that comes out that'll have like your elements and everything, but that's not too important to look at right now. We'll look at how to do that with Bootstrap at some point in the future. Awesome. So change this to row instead of row reverse. And now if we move it back out to normal size, you see it just moves over to the side there. So awesome. This is pretty much exactly how it's handled for responsive websites. You can write pretty much anything in here you want to, access any and modify any elements. It's almost always put at the bottom because it will overwrite anything. It goes from top to bottom, and anything that's overwritten, the last one to be written will be the one that overwrites it. So, yep, media queries are almost always put at the bottom. So, great. You probably won't be writing too many media queries manually, as you'll be using Bootstrap and stuff. Even if you're not using the custom UI elements, you'll usually use Bootstrap to define how things look, or how things are formatted. So, not too important that you don't know every single little bit, but you need to know that media queries exist, and these are how things are formatted, because sometimes you will need to write custom media queries for certain devices. All right, already practiced. We did use a little bit of Bootstrap to make our website pretty. You've read the documentation. It's super easy to read. It's super nice. So I'd recommend between now and the next time we meet, just look at Bootstrap and look at how to make things look nice. Use it to make the website look better than it is. And I'll follow up and post an update on the event listener, because I'm not sure why that's not being handled properly. Maybe some weird API update or something, but yeah, I don't know what's going on with it. Very quickly, I want to explain, we have like a little under 5 minutes left. I really want to talk about frameworks and libraries, because this is what we are going to be focusing on for the next couple of weeks. What is a framework? What is a library? If you aren't familiar, the three most popular frameworks and libraries are Vue, React, and Angular. What these do is they give you a framework or a library, but framework in the sense of something to build on top of that allows you to program much easier, get a product much faster, and not have to deal with the annoying intricacies of CSS and annoying details with JavaScript. Many of them will use TypeScript instead of JavaScript, which is JavaScript but with types. So there's no dynamic types. You have to actually write the types, which is good for maintaining good code. But they also allow teams to work together and write end-to-end tests really easily. And they are super, super flexible. They have things like two-way data binding, which is super nice, because like if you are typing into Google and they're showing you something as you're typing, that's an example of two-way data binding, because you're inputting data. Well, actually, let me say this: when you're inputting data, you're importing something, and then something is updating on the screen. This is an example of two-way data binding, because the data, when you're typing it in, is sort of actively interacting with some JavaScript code. And then that JavaScript code is binding to some elements on the screen and modifying those based off of that. So that is an example of two-way data binding. This is something that's super easy to do with frameworks and libraries. They allow for super powerful features, like writing HTML elements as for loops, and writing, as a matter of fact, React, all elements that are written to the screen are just returned from a JavaScript function. When you basically it calls a main JavaScript function, and that JavaScript function will return some HTML, and that HTML is what will be rendered to the screen. So, let me explain. React is a library, which means that React by itself is just something that you would import. And it usually will set up a little bit of project, but they aren't really necessary. They're there more to set up a project, to have a good directory structure. But React is a library. It's something you import, and then it uses that and a React compiler to, and it's less of a compiler, more like an interpreter. But it uses that to sort of give you a website. Whereas Angular and Vue are frameworks. So these frameworks are compiled, and they have they'll usually have a pretty massive directory structure set up with basic end-to-end testing, a bunch of configs for Node and all this stuff set up, but they're very, very powerful. They can reduce to much, much smaller code. They can be much faster to work with. And whether you decide which one you want to go to is ultimately personal preference. But we'll go into a little bit more detail in the future and look at actual code examples. So yeah, these are the two main ways of handling, or these are the three primary libraries and frameworks. There are some more fun ones coming out. I know there's like Svelte, which has become popular recently. Yeah, there's a lot of fun frameworks and libraries coming off. A lot of them are based off of these other ones because, like, I believe all of these are open source, if I recall. React is like React is made by Facebook. If you're not familiar, React has absolutely nothing added to it. It is literally just there so that you can write. All your HTML code is basically JavaScript components, and then it gets pulled into a file and everything, and you get a website. But all of these, Angular is also is made by Google. So these are all supported by big companies, but Angular and Vue have actual modules created by the developers of those frameworks, whereas React relies solely on the community to provide the extra libraries and stuff needed to get like routing and animations and all that stuff installed. You can of course have custom modules in Vue and Angular. Vue has a really, really nice interface for doing that, which is super cool. But they have a lot of these built in, and you can also download them if you need to. React, literally nothing is built in. You have to use some sort of module, which can lead to a massive dependency chain, which is a common problem in React projects. But we'll get into that more in detail over time. Sorry about that. Like I said, Angular, Vue, and React we'll be getting to into the next topics. Super satisfying. The only thing left on there is Angular, Vue, and React. They're really, really big topics. But we're finally done going over all of the basics. And now in the future, we'll be able to work on some bigger projects. So thank you to all of you who stuck with me so far. I really appreciate it. This is the end of our main tutorial series. And the next one will be likely more like a live coding, where we'll be dealing with these frameworks and having a little bit of fun, learning a little bit about them, and creating a site. So thank you all for joining, whether you're virtual, in person. Sorry about the complications. Hopefully in the future we don't have any other major ones. I'm going to upload this video, and the video shouldn't have any issues, hopefully not. And I will also write an update on the event handler and why that might be having some issues. Thank you all for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to post a comment, send me a message on Discord, post a message in the SIG WebDev chat. Thank you.